What is up, YouTube? Today is going to be a special video. We are bringing in a highly regarded guest that's going to go over some common tips, some myths, and some questions surrounding hair loss and hair growth. If you don't know, my name is Zeph. I've been growing back my hair for the last year, and we've seen some great progress, grown a huge community. This is a very extensive, in-depth conversation, so there will be two parts. This is going to be the first part, and I'll be posting the second part here in a couple days. And we finally got our silver plaque on 100,000 subscribers. We did it, baby. Next goal is the gold plaque, which is 1 million subscribers. So hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. It would help me out tremendously. So with that being said, thank you guys for the support, and I hope you guys enjoy the video and learn something like I did. Love y'all. Peace. Simon, good to have you on. Let's start with you just introducing yourself and what you do and who you are.
Great. Thanks so much, Zeph. It's great to be here and love what you've been doing, by the way. So my name's Simon Pimstone. I'm a founder and CEO of Zion Health. I'm a physician by background, internal medicine specialist. I have a practice focusing in preventative cardiology. I also have a science degree. I'm a PhD in genetics. And I've spent probably 25 or so years in drug development, developing novel medicines for a variety of medical disorders. The latest, obviously, being hair loss, but before that, pain, epilepsy, cancer, and a few other things. So I've been quite involved both on the science side, the clinical side, and the drug development side, Zeph. So it's great to be here and just excited to chat with you.
Awesome. I'm excited to have you on and have you integrated into my community and some questions they have for you.
I'll do my best.
So probably my most common question I get asked is the relationship between creatine and hair loss, and if there's any. And I kind of wanted to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, it's a common question I get. I see a lot of young guys actually clinically in my practice as well who train, and as we know, pre-workout supplements or drinks, many of which include creatine. Caffeine is another substitute or ingredient that's often used. Are used for a variety of reasons. Obviously, they're used to improve muscle mass, but also to improve performance and also improve recovery. So it's a common supplement used before exercise, and we get this question a lot, Zeph. There is some literature which has shown that creatine can increase the levels of DHT. The literature is pretty scant. There was a study that really got things going by a South African in 2019, Van der Merwe was his name, and that looked at a very high loading dose of creatine at about 25 grams a day. The normal recommended daily dose is around 3 to 5 grams a day. So in Van der Merwe's study, for about 7 days, they took 25 grams of creatine for 7 days, and then they went on to 5 grams a day for about 2 weeks. And they did show about a 30 to 50% increase in DHT levels in a number of those athletes. The criticism of that study, and that's really where things got exciting with creatine, the criticism is it's a pretty small study. It's an unusual dose. It's not a dose that typically men will take. And it hasn't been replicated. There have been more studies around that time and subsequent that have not really confirmed this increase in DHT. So I think the jury's sort of outish in a way, but I don't think we can say there's very strong evidence that creatine causes hair loss for people who take it. Remember, even increasing DHT, Zeph, isn't necessarily going to induce hair loss. It will do so in someone who's genetically susceptible, right? And that's where this argument becomes interesting. For some people, higher levels of DHT may not be a bad thing in terms of causing shedding or what we call hair fall. But in others who are genetically susceptible, it can be very toxic to the hair. So I would say on creatine, jury's out, not a lot of strong evidence for it in terms of causing hair loss.
Awesome. I love that answer because I have similar feelings about it. And even in certain studies, the increase of DHT shows that it might not even be a high increase. Like it's increasing, but it's not going into like astronomical levels of
That's
DHT,
right.
like
That's
actually
right. And
affecting you.
that's right. And we probably get these surges of DHT just with exercise, because as you know, DHT is a product formed from testosterone. And as we engage in exercise, our testosterone does go up acutely, comes down. Similarly, cortisol, which is another what we call stress hormone, goes up with exercise. So there's always a question also, does exercise cause hair loss? And sort of the answer I give my patients, and based on, quite extensive reading I've done over the years, is short-term exercise. It's a bit like the creatine argument. It's not going to cause hair loss because that DHT rise is very transient. It's short-lived. There is a suggestion, perhaps, that people that engage in chronic high intensity exercise, where cortisol and DHT levels are sustained, that certainly can affect the health of the hair follicle. And of course, when you exercise at a high intensity, there's also a likelihood to have oils on the scalp, and you may get what we call microinflammation from the cytokines that get released with high levels of cortisol. And these cytokines can also cause microinflammation, damage, and move the hair from the anagen or growth phase into this telogen, catagen phase, and then ultimately exogen phase, which is the shedding. So, going beyond the pre-workout drinks like creatine or caffeine, exercise has pros and cons in terms of hair, but in general, exercise is great for you. It's great for your hair health.
I think that's the biggest question is is it worth it? If you're worried about your hair, is there certain exercises you should be avoiding?
No,
Like lifting
absolutely
heavy?
not. No, I think, as I said, I think the real culprit, if any, is going to be long-term, chronic, very high-intensity exercise. Um, and that high-intensity exercise is going to have an impact also depending on your genetic susceptibility, right? You're looking at a guy like me who has no hair. I lost my hair in my 20s, clearly highly genetically susceptible. When I was in my 20s, there was absolutely nothing available to protect my hair. So someone like me with high intensity chronic exercise may be a bit more likely to have some shedding related to those elevations in cytokines and cortisol. But of course, it's not just the exercise itself. It's medications or drugs people may take. Anabolic steroids are a terrible thing for hair, as they are a terrible thing for other functions. I've seen many patients come in to my practice, intense exercise, taking steroids, with severe liver dysfunction, cholesterol abnormalities, sexual dysfunction, and hair loss. Of course, terrible skin conditions, bad acne as well from anabolic steroids. So the exercise in itself, is not the only thing to think about. It's the supplements we take around it. It's how we keep our hair, the health of that environment. And of course, medications and or drugs like anabolic steroids can be major culprits in inducing hair loss.
For sure. Would you say that hey, that person has some hair loss, that person has high testosterone, or would you say the levels of testosterone can affect hair loss?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's always this there's been this myth, I would say, that you lose your hair, you're more virile because your levels of testosterone are higher. That's not really true, although I like to say it is, but it's not really true, Zeph.
I also say
Um,
that's true.
the reality is a lot of pattern hair loss in men and in women as well, but particularly so in men, where pattern hair loss is much, much, much more androgen dependent than in women. A lot of it is due to the sensitivity of your androgen receptors in the hair follicle to DHT. So DHT, in order to have its effect on hair growth, on maturation of hair, has to bind to a androgen receptor and allow then chemical reactions to occur after that binding happens within the dermal papilla cell, within the hair follicles. And it's that level of sensitivity that really is at play. So people that lose their hair may have actually relatively normal levels, in fact, can have completely normal levels of DHT, but the receptor is highly sensitive to that DHT. So you get very, very tight sticking of the DHT to that receptor, which then induces these metabolic cascades that result in loss or shedding. On the other hand, there are individuals and where DHT levels themselves can be very, very high. And of course, if you sort of swamp the system,
Mhm.
that is going to have some impact. But most of it is your sensitivity at your receptor level. Now that is often genetic. It's been looked at for years and years. Is there a single major gene that causes this? Probably not. It's probably what we call polygenic or multigenic, meaning you inherit this genetic susceptibility from many different genetic contributors, many genes. They each have a little minor effect here and there. And it's just incredible how complex our genes are. With only 20 to 30,000 genes in our human genome, it's remarkable how they function and create this marked variability from human to human. And of course, a lot of that variability we see in hair follicles and our sensitivity to DHT. So your question's a good one. High DHT is not necessary to lose your hair. It's the sensitivity of that receptor to DHT that's actually critical. We think about the natural ingredients that perhaps have been shown to have some degree of benefit. And there are probably about half a dozen where I'd say the data is strongest. One is your favorite, which is rosemary oil and peppermint oil. I would say high on the list. The second would be pea sprout extracts. The third would be ginseng. Saw palmetto is the obvious, and saw palmetto I'll come back to because its function is actually quite interesting and it speaks a bit to your question. Caffeine is another one where at modest concentrations is thought to have a benefit. And then biotin, which is vitamin B7. So I think those are sort of your 6 key natural ingredients. Now, those natural ingredients, firstly, alone are probably not sufficient to cause meaningful hair growth. I think they optimize the environment to allow for hair to grow optimally. All right. And so we always think about it as in men who really need to grow their hair, medication is usually necessary. But for those who don't want, I mean, there are natural products, but people have to have an understanding that it's not going to put hair on my head.
Yep.
It's going to help optimize. And the way these natural products work, and it's a long-winded way of trying to get to your question, is they really have multiple different functions. Enhanced blood flow is thought to be one function. Antioxidant effects and the neutralization of these toxic reactive oxygen species, which can be toxic to the hair follicle, is a second. Anti-inflammatory effects, third. And then lastly, anti-androgen effects. And this is probably where most information resides around saw palmetto, which, as you know, is another very commonly used natural agent. Saw palmetto is a plant extract. It comes from a palm-like plant that's native to the southern parts of the US. And it's actually been shown in vitro, which means in lab studies, to competitively to compete for the 5-alpha reductase binding with testosterone. So as you know, 5-alpha reductase converts testosterone to DHT. If you now throw saw palmetto in, that 5-alpha reductase is binding to saw palmetto instead of testosterone with less conversion of DHT. And that's thought to be one of the effects of saw palmetto. I don't think we know what natural ingredients specifically and reliably increase or reduce the sensitivity of the androgen receptor, which is your question. But these natural ingredients have what we call pleiotropic effects, which are numerous effects that can impact blood flow, antioxidants, neutralization of reactive toxic oxidation species, anti-inflammatory and anti-androgen functions, all to different degrees and in different ways. But you know what we say about these natural ingredients is, for people with hair loss, they're probably not going to do harm unless you're taking them at really high doses. They probably will help in creating a healthier scalp and a healthier hair environment that really then improves the foundation for treatment for those that need treatment. And that would be supportive. But you know, no really large, well-controlled clinical trials have been done, and nor will they likely ever be done.
Yeah.
These natural ingredients. Whereas we do have that data with minoxidil, with finasteride, with dutasteride in terms of hair growth. Similarly to some of these other natural products that I've talked about, pea extract, ginseng, rosemary, peppermint, caffeine, saw palmetto, there are a number of vitamins that also are thought to have some important function. Biotin, of course, is key. Certainly, biotin is thought to improve function of hair and nails. A lot of that data comes from actually a fairly rare group of patients that are biotin deficient, which shows they have abnormalities in hair and nails. And when you supplement them, it improves hair growth. Vitamin C, very, very important antioxidant that can neutralize these toxic reactive oxygen species, which can be toxic to the genetic functioning of the hair follicle. And then vitamin D is another very, very important vitamin for hair health and skin health, and probably, amongst the most important of the sort of natural micronutrient ingredients, vitamin ingredients. So vitamin D is a very important a vitamin produced by the action of UV light, the skin, and also in the liver and kidneys, and is very important to integrity or maintaining the integrity of the skin and the hair follicle. So vitamins B7, which is biotin, vitamin C and its antioxidant function, as well as its iron absorptive function. Vitamin C helps us absorb iron, particularly in women. Iron deficiency is a very important factor in hair loss. And then, of course, vitamin D. And this is why so many of us in Canada are vitamin D deficient, because we just don't get enough sunlight. And so taking vitamin D supplementation is important. All of these vitamins, by the way, and this is very important for your audience, don't think because something's a vitamin, it's safe at any dose. It's not true. I've actually seen people come in with liver failure with vitamin A toxicity.
That's crazy.
People can actually become deathly ill overdosing on vitamins. So it's very important to keep to the recommended allowance, the recommended daily allowance of these micronutrients, nutrients, and vitamins. Iron is another very important nutrient in aiding function of the dermal papilla cells. How that works and how it impacts the genetics and replication of the hair follicle cells, it's not well known, but it's thought to have its effect that way. So iron, vitamins B7, vitamin C, vitamin D, really, really important group of micronutrients. Magnesium as well, thought to be very helpful. We've talked about all of the other natural ingredients that I would recommend.
Yeah. And with someone dealing with male pattern baldness or someone that's losing their hair, would you say that taking vitamins could realistically help them, or how much would it help them?
Yeah.
Or is it even close to enough?
I think the question of vitamins and how much and what degree it would help is really a function of what your diet looks like and how replete you are. In other words, do you have sufficient vitamins consumed naturally in your diet? Most of us, Zeph, are not vitamin deficient. I come from South Africa, and we would often see in rural parts of South Africa vitamin and or protein malnutrition because the diet just doesn't have enough of the requisite vitamins or proteins. And these kids used to come into hospital with terrible skin and hair loss and brittle hair and amongst other serious conditions. But most of us, certainly in North America, are fortunate enough to have diets that are replete in vitamins. That often our foods can be fortified with things like folic acid, necessary for DNA replication and cell replication. So for most people, I would say the addition of vitamins taken as supplements are going to have marginal but some degree of benefit. They, again, improve the environment at normal doses. They're not doing harm. I had a professor at medical school in Cape Town who used to tell us that taking vitamins, all it was expensive urine. And in other words, you take them, you pay a lot for them, and you pass out what your body doesn't need. I think for most people, while vitamins are helpful, they're not going to take someone from meaningful androgenetic or pattern hair loss to hair growth. They will help in optimizing the health of the scalp and the health of the hair follicle, but don't expect vitamins to regrow your hair from quite marked loss to significant hair. It just won't happen. Now, having a diet that's healthy, that's low in trans fats, that's got enough poly and monounsaturated fatty acids, fish oils, olive oils, that classic Mediterranean diet, which is so good for cardiac health, for skin, for hair health. That certainly is going to be beneficial. A lot of our diets, certainly in the Western world, are very oriented towards animal proteins. Of course, unfortunately, a lot of fast foods, a lot of, trans fats, although we are seeing less and less of that, a reliance on carbohydrates. Um, and we miss out often in that diet on a lot of the good nutrients. People are generally not having enough servings of vegetables, of plant proteins, of fruits. And so finding that optimal diet to me is always the best way to go. If you feel your diet is not replete, yes, some replacement with multivites or these hair vitamins, as I said, B7, C, D, and particularly in women, iron could be very important.
Yeah. I think it's great to see people taking care of their health, but doesn't always mean they're gonna keep their hair, and vice versa. People just absolutely trash their body and they have a full head of hair and
Yeah.
they don't have the androgenic alopecia. And even to touch on that just a little bit further with smoking and vaping, I know this wasn't on our chart, but
Yeah.
even to the further extent of how much smoking or vaping would affect hair loss.
Yeah, the effect of smoking and vaping obviously is widespread in terms of its deleterious effect on the body and absolutely causes DNA damage. Nicotine gets into the system. It isn't just in the lungs, it circulates. It gets into the skin, it gets into the hair follicles. There are ingredients and excipients in vape that we know can cause massive damage. Of course, most of that is localized to the lungs because of the very high load of those excipients as you inhale. But similarly with nicotine, that can have a very profound effect on skin um, and skin health. And of course, the scalp is skin. And uh, and so while the data has not really been extensive in terms of large-scale controlled studies, there certainly seems to be a meaningful association between smoking and hair loss or shedding. And so, of course, all of these factors, if one can eliminate these toxins, cigarette smoking, these reactive oxygen species, excessive cytokine levels with chronic inflammation and chronic stress, all of these things together, obesity and weight gain is another factor. As we gain weight, by the way, our body releases cytokines. It's like it puts us into a chronic inflammatory state.
Mhm.
And so, you know, losing weight and exercising and maintaining a diet has huge benefit in terms of optimizing our skin health. And hair health is reliant on skin health. So yes, nicotine and vaping will definitely have an effect in people, and stopping that will be very, very important as well. It's interesting. I spend a lot of my time looking at people with heart disease. If cigarette smoking has a big effect on good cholesterol levels as well. Can really lower people's level of HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol, protective. So lots of reasons to kick that habit, let alone the impact it has on lung disease, which we all know and has been touted and known for years.
Yeah. If you're not worried about your body's health, at least, or your hair health, at least be
Yeah.
worried about your
Worried
body.
about something, worried about something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
It's
there are
more
things we
important.
can do. And what's interesting, Zeph, for most of the audience, you don't have to become, and I tell my patients this all the time, you don't have to become a marathon runner, and you don't have to become, you know, a strict 100% vegan for your body to have a very significant response to these changes. Brisk walking 3 to 4 times a week at a moderate to vigorous intensity. As I say to my patients, go for a walk, not walking your dog,
30
put your
minutes.
walking shoes on, go for it. Um, and have more plant protein in our diet. We don't eat enough legumes. We don't eat enough beans. We don't eat enough tofu. More plant protein, less animal proteins, bit more vigorous activity. Actually easy to do. It's all about making it a priority in your life. It's funny, when I worked in the coronary care units, if the time people would give up cigarettes and go on a diet, is after they've had a heart attack. It's when people are most compliant.
Yeah.
That's good, but in a way, it's too late. You
Yeah.
got to kind of have the mindset, particularly if there's a family history. And it's the same with hair, by the way. If there's a family history of hair loss in your mother's side, in your father's side, particularly at a younger age, it's got an 80% plus chance happening to you. You got to tackle that early, because the earlier we treat anything like hair loss, the better the long-term treatment outcomes will be. And so I always say to my patients, whether it's their heart health, weight, blood sugar, blood pressure, or hair loss, get in front of it early. You'll have a much better effect by treating something earlier.